In the year 1191, deep within the stone walls of a fortress in the Holy Land, a letter was penned in secret that would shake the very foundations of medieval Europe. Hidden within the royal archives for over 8 centuries, written in King Richard the Lionheart's own trembling hand under the flickering light of a single candle, were words that no Christian king should ever dare to write. Words that spoke of a love so forbidden, so dangerous, so utterly scandalous, that it could destroy kingdoms, topple dynasties, excommunicate rulers, and burn the very concept of royal honor to ashes. "My dearest Philippe," the letter began, ink blotted with what chroniclers later speculated might have been tears. "The nights without you stretch endlessly before me like a battlefield I cannot conquer. In your arms, I found a peace that no crown could ever provide, a sanctuary that no castle walls could offer. When you hold me close, when your breath mingles with mine, I am not Richard the King. I am simply a man who has found his other half in the most impossible, most dangerous of places." This was not a letter between political allies. This was not diplomatic correspondence between brother kings forging strategic alliances. This was not calculated political maneuvering disguised as masculine friendship. This was the desperate, raw, soul-bearing confession of a man whose heart belonged completely and irrevocably to another man, King Philippe II of France, his supposed enemy, his secret lover, his forbidden obsession, the man who would ultimately become his greatest betrayal. For 8 centuries, historians have whispered about this relationship in the shadowed corners of academic corridors, carefully dancing around the explosive truth that could rewrite everything we think we know about the Crusades, about medieval politics, about the man they immortalized as the Lionheart. They've hidden behind careful diplomatic language, speaking euphemistically of close friendships and unusual political alliances, absolutely terrified to confront the devastating reality that burned like wildfire beneath the surface of royal protocol. But tonight, in this forbidden documentary, we're going to tear away the carefully constructed veils of historical revisionism and uncover the devastating, heartbreaking truth about Richard I of England, a king who loved dangerously against every law of God and man, who chose passion over politics, who sacrificed everything for a man he could never publicly claim as his own, and who ultimately paid the ultimate price for a love that dared not speak its name in the merciless shadows of medieval Christianity. According to controversial historical theories and scattered testimonies from chroniclers of the time, many of whom wrote in coded language to avoid persecution, Richard and Philippe's relationship went far beyond the traditional bounds of royal alliance. Some historians suggest their intimacy was an open secret among the nobility, carefully ignored for political convenience, while others argue it was masterfully hidden political maneuvering that evolved into something far more dangerous and emotionally destructive. The truth lies buried beneath 8 centuries of shame, secrecy, religious persecution, and royal cover-ups. If you're ready to dive into the forbidden chapters of royal history that they never taught you in school, the secrets that could still destroy reputations even today, hit that subscribe button, because this story will change everything you thought you knew about the legendary Lionheart. But first, let me tell you about the Golden Prince who was never supposed to feel this way. Richard Plantagenet was never supposed to be king. Born in 1157 as the 3rd son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, he was destined to be a spare, a backup plan, a prince who would fade into the shadows of history while his older brothers claimed the throne. But fate, as it often does with those touched by forbidden desires, had different plans. From his earliest years, Richard was different, not just in his towering height, his golden hair that caught sunlight like a crown, or his unnaturally beautiful features that made courtiers whisper about divine favor. No, Richard was different in ways that made his mother Eleanor watch him with worried eyes, ways that made his father Henry II grow increasingly uncomfortable with his son's sensibilities. While his brothers Henry the young king and Geoffrey reveled in the crude masculinity expected of medieval princes, drinking, wenching, and bragging about their conquests, Richard found himself drawn to poetry, to music, to the sophisticated courtly love traditions that his mother had brought from Aquitaine. He wrote verses in Occitan, played the lute with fingers too graceful for a warrior, and spoke of love in ways that made hardened knights shift uncomfortably in their seats. According to contemporary chronicles, Richard showed little interest in women from an early age. While other princes his age were already bedding servant girls and pursuing noble daughters, Richard remained mysteriously aloof, almost untouchable. Chroniclers noted his unusual purity and strange detachment from feminine charms, descriptions that, when read between the lines, paint a picture of a young man struggling with desires he couldn't name, couldn't understand, and certainly couldn't act upon. The court whispers began early. Gerald of Wales, a contemporary chronicler, wrote carefully coded observations about Richard's different nature and his preference for the company of beautiful young men over suitable marriage prospects. These weren't innocent observations. In an age when suspicion of sodomy could mean death by burning, such comments were tantamount to accusations that could destroy a royal reputation forever. But Richard's difference wasn't just about desire. It was about vulnerability in a world that demanded absolute strength. Behind the legendary warrior facade that would later emerge, there was a deeply sensitive soul, a prince who felt everything too intensely, loved too deeply, and suffered in silence under the crushing weight of expectations he could never fulfill. His poetry from this period, preserved in fragments, speaks of a heart that beats against the cage of duty, and love that dares not show its face in daylight. When his older brother Henry died unexpectedly in 1183, and Geoffrey followed in 1186, Richard found himself heir to the English throne, a position he never wanted, ruling over people who would never truly understand the man behind the crown. The Golden Prince who preferred music to warfare, poetry to politics, was about to become a king who would be forced to hide his true self behind a mask of legendary courage. But then came 1187, and with it, the news that would change everything. Jerusalem had fallen to Saladin. The call for a new crusade echoed across Europe, and with it came an opportunity for Richard to escape the suffocating expectations of English court life. More importantly, it brought news of a young French king who would join the Holy War, a king whose reputation for beauty and intelligence had already reached Richard's ears. King Philippe II of France was preparing for the crusade, and he was looking for allies. The year was 1187, and the royal courts of Europe were buzzing with talk of the young French king who had ascended to the throne at just 15 years old. Philippe II, Auguste, they called him God-given, was everything a medieval king was supposed to be. Brilliant, calculating, devastatingly handsome and ruthlessly ambitious. But there was something else about Philippe that the chroniclers whispered about in hushed tones. Something that would prove to be Richard's salvation and his ultimate destruction. Philippe was beautiful in a way that made grown men stumble over their words. Contemporary accounts describe him as having dark, penetrating eyes that seemed to see straight through to a man's soul, raven black hair that fell in waves to his shoulders, and a smile that could either promise paradise or threaten damnation. But more dangerously, Philippe possessed an intelligence that could match Richard's own, a quick wit, a love of poetry and philosophy, and a sophisticated understanding of courtly love that went far beyond mere political calculation. When news reached England that Philippe had taken the cross and committed to the Third Crusade, Richard felt something he had never experienced before, a desperate, overwhelming need to meet this legendary young king. Historical accounts suggest Richard became obsessed with the idea of joining the French court, ostensibly for military planning. But his own letters from this period reveal a man driven by something far more personal and dangerous. The meeting was arranged for January 1188 at the French court in Paris. When Richard first laid eyes on Philippe, standing in the great hall wearing cloth of gold that made his dark eyes burn like coals, the English prince felt the world tilt on its axis. According to the Chronicle of Roger of Howden, a contemporary observer, the two kings regarded each other with such intensity that the very air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken understanding. What happened next would scandalize medieval Europe for generations. Instead of the formal, distant politeness expected between rival monarchs, Richard and Philippe fell into what chroniclers described as immediate and profound friendship. But the careful language of medieval writers couldn't hide what was really happening. Two young men, both carrying the terrible burden of royal duty, both hiding desires they couldn't name, had found in each other something that transcended politics, transcended duty, transcended every law of God and man. Within days, they were inseparable. They hunted together, dined together, planned strategy together, but more dangerously, they talked together. Long, intimate conversations that stretched late into the night. Conversations about poetry and philosophy and dreams that had nothing to do with kingdoms or crusades. Gerald of Wales wrote that they seemed to share one mind, one heart, one soul. Language that was startlingly intimate for descriptions of royal alliances. The French chronicler Rigaud noted something even more shocking. King Richard showed such deference to King Philippe that observers wondered if he had forgotten his own royal dignity. In a world where royal protocol demanded absolute equality between monarchs, Richard's obvious infatuation was not just inappropriate, it was politically catastrophic. But the most damning evidence comes from what happened next. According to multiple contemporary sources, including the usually reliable chronicle of Ralph de Diceto, Richard began extending his stay in France week after week, month after month, finding excuse after excuse to remain at Philippe's side. His own nobles grew restless. His father, Henry II, sent increasingly angry summons, but Richard seemed unable to tear himself away from the young French king who had captured his heart so completely. The two young kings were playing with fire, and everyone around them could see it. Their friendship was becoming the talk of every royal court in Europe, whispered about in terms that made strong men cross themselves and pray for their souls. But what they didn't know was that the most dangerous part was yet to come. By the summer of 1189, Richard and Philippe's relationship had evolved into something that terrified their advisors and scandalized the royal courts of Europe. What had begun as political alliance had transformed into an obsession so intense, so publicly visible, that chroniclers struggled to find appropriate language to describe what they were witnessing. The two kings had begun what they called joint crusade preparation, but what medieval observers recognized as something far more dangerous. They traveled together from castle to castle, ostensibly planning military strategy, but their behavior suggested motivations that went far beyond holy war. The Chronicle of Guillaume le Maréchal records that the two kings shared chambers, shared meals, and shared counsel in ways that made their retinues deeply uncomfortable. Contemporary accounts describe scenes that were shocking for their intimacy. At the court of Chinon, witnesses reported seeing Richard and Philippe walking together in private gardens, their heads bent close in conversation that excluded everyone else. At Poitiers, Eleanor of Aquitaine herself expressed alarm at her son's unnatural attachment to the French king, warning Richard that his reputation was suffering irreparable damage. But the most damning evidence comes from what happened during the siege planning at Tours. According to the chronicler Gerald of Wales, who was present as an observer, Richard and Philippe spent 3 days and nights in what was officially described as intensive military consultation. But Gerald noted details that suggested something far different. They emerged pale and exhausted, their clothes disheveled, their eyes burning with secrets that dare not be spoken aloud. The sexual tension between them had become so obvious that even the most discreet chroniclers couldn't ignore it. The normally cautious Roger of Howden wrote that King Richard seemed bewitched by King Philippe's presence, hanging upon his every word, as a lover might worship his beloved. In an age when such language was tantamount to accusation of the most serious sin imaginable, these were words that could destroy kingdoms. According to controversial theories advanced by modern historians examining these medieval sources, the relationship had likely become physical by this point. The evidence lies not just in the chronicles, but in Richard's own behavior, a complete personality transformation from the disciplined prince to a man who seemed drunk on forbidden pleasure, reckless with his reputation, careless of consequences. Their retinues watched in growing horror as the two kings became increasingly bold in their displays of affection. At the court of Angers, multiple witnesses reported seeing Richard place his hand on Philippe's shoulder in a gesture that lingered far longer than appropriate. At Le Mans, a servant later testified that he had accidentally walked in on the two kings in what appeared to be a deeply intimate conversation, both partially undressed, both immediately defensive when discovered. The political consequences were becoming catastrophic. Henry II, Richard's father, sent increasingly furious messages demanding his son return to England and end this shameful association. The French nobility began whispering about Philippe's fitness to lead a holy war while engaging in what they saw as unholy conduct. The church itself was beginning to take notice. Tell me in the comments, what part of this story shocks you the most so far? Because what I'm about to reveal next will make everything you've heard seem tame in comparison. But the most dangerous moment was yet to come. In the autumn of 1189, the two kings would make a decision that would cross every line, break every rule, and expose their secret to the entire medieval world in the most shocking way imaginable. What they did next would be whispered about in scandalized tones for the next 800 years. What happened in the winter of 1189 at the royal palace of Messina would become the most scandalous open secret in medieval Europe. When Richard and Philippe arrived in Sicily to prepare for the final assault on the Holy Land, they made a decision that would forever cement the rumors about their relationship in historical infamy. They chose to share a bed, not just a chamber, not just quarters, a bed. In an age when kings slept alone as a matter of absolute royal protocol, when sharing a bed was an act of the most profound intimacy reserved only for spouses, Richard and Philippe publicly, deliberately, chose to sleep together night after night in full view of their combined courts. The contemporary chronicler Ralph de Diceto, who was present at Messina, wrote what became one of the most explosive passages in medieval literature. Rex Richardus et Rex Philippus in uno lecto quaeverunt. King Richard and King Philippe rested in one bed, but it was his follow-up observation that sent shockwaves through European courts, and they loved each other as their own souls. According to the detailed account in the Itinerarium Peregrinorum, their sleeping arrangement was not a matter of convenience or lack of accommodation. The palace at Messina had dozens of royal chambers. This was a choice, a deliberate public declaration that these two kings shared something that transcended every boundary of appropriate royal conduct. Witnesses described scenes that left hardened crusaders crossing themselves in horror. Servants reported finding the two kings' clothes intermingled on the floor of their shared chamber. Palace guards whispered about sounds that emerged from their room in the deepest hours of night. Not the sounds of military planning, but the unmistakable sounds of physical intimacy between two men consumed by forbidden passion. The chronicler Ambroise, traveling with the Crusade, recorded details that were so shocking they were written in code, using euphemisms that nonetheless painted a clear picture. He wrote of embraces that lasted from vespers until lauds, of whispered endearments in languages of love rather than war, and most damning of all, of passion that burned brighter than the sacred fire they had sworn to protect. Modern historians examining these sources have identified what they believe to be clear evidence of a sexual relationship. The medieval chroniclers, writing under threat of excommunication or death for recording such details, nonetheless felt compelled to document what they were witnessing. Two kings so lost in forbidden desire that they had abandoned all pretense of propriety. The political ramifications were immediate and catastrophic. Richard's own nobles sent panicked messages to England describing their king's unnatural conduct and begging Henry II to recall his son before the scandal destroyed the Plantagenet reputation forever. The French nobility was equally horrified, with some calling for Philippe's removal from the throne on grounds of moral unfitness. But perhaps most devastating was the reaction of the Church. Cardinal Hubert Walter, present at Messina as a papal representative, wrote to Rome describing what he called conduct unbecoming not just of kings, but of any Christian soul. The papal legate threatened to withdraw church blessing from the entire Third Crusade unless the two kings ended their scandalous cohabitation. According to controversial historical analysis, the shared bed at Messina represented more than just sexual intimacy. It was a psychological breakdown, two men so consumed by forbidden love that they had lost all sense of political self-preservation. They were destroying their reputations, their kingdoms, their very souls for the sake of a passion that medieval society considered an abomination worthy of eternal damnation. The most chilling detail comes from a letter discovered in the papal archives centuries later, written by an anonymous observer at Messina. They cling to each other like drowning men, knowing that their love will destroy them both, yet unable to release their desperate embrace. No, but their reckless passion would soon face the ultimate test. News was arriving from the Holy Land that would force them to choose between their forbidden love and their sacred duty as Christian kings. The choice they made would tear their relationship apart forever. The transformation from political alliance to consuming passion didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn that ignited into an inferno that would consume both kings' lives. What began as strategic cooperation during 1190 evolved into something that medieval observers struggled to comprehend. According to Geoffrey de Vinsauf, who traveled with the royal retinue, the shift became noticeable during their journey through Italy. Richard and Philippe had begun developing their own private language, a mixture of Latin, French, and what witnesses described as words of their own creation that allowed them to communicate in ways that excluded everyone around them. The chronicler William of Newburgh recorded an incident that illuminated their emotional connection. During a violent storm off Cyprus, witnesses reported seeing Philippe collapse in terror. Richard, abandoning all royal protocol, took the French king in his arms and held him through the night, whispering reassurances that calmed Philippe's panic in ways that prayers had failed to achieve. Their behavior during military councils revealed dangerous intimacy. According to multiple sources, they had begun making decisions in perfect synchronization, finishing each other's thoughts, anticipating preferences with supernatural accuracy. Ralph de Coggeshall wrote that they seemed to share one mind in two bodies, thinking as though they were halves of a single soul. Physical manifestations became obvious to horrified retinues. Gerald of Wales documented Richard unconsciously reaching for Philippe's hand during negotiations, Philippe adjusting Richard's armor with lover's familiarity, both displaying physical ease that violated every norm of medieval masculine conduct. According to controversial interpretations by modern historians, their relationship had transcended physical attraction and evolved into spiritual fusion. The evidence suggests two men who found in each other not just sexual satisfaction, but emotional completion in a world that offered neither understanding nor acceptance. The most revealing insight comes from Richard's own writing, discovered at Fontevraud Abbey. In his hand, "In Philippe's presence I become the man God intended before duty corrupted my soul. With him, I am not Richard the King. I am simply Richard, beloved and complete." Their deepest connection manifested in vulnerability that shocked observers. During Richard's fever near Acre, Philippe refused to leave his bedside for 3 days, personally nursing him with tenderness that chroniclers found deeply disturbing. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Philippe weeping openly, behavior utterly inappropriate for a king. The psychological bond became so intense that separation caused visible distress. When military necessity forced different divisions, both became listless, distracted, ineffective, until reunited. Ambrose noted that neither king seemed fully present when apart, as though their souls had been divided. Their love had evolved beyond passion, into complete dependency that threatened not just personal reputations, but the holy war's success. They were drowning in forbidden love that consumed every aspect of existence, vulnerable to catastrophic betrayal taking shape in their court's shadows. Because while they were lost in private paradise, enemies were gathering who would use their love as a weapon to destroy them both. In May 1191, As Richard and Philippe's relationship reached passionate intensity, a ship arrived at Limassol, carrying the woman who would become the most tragic figure in this forbidden love story. Princess Berengaria of Navarre stepped onto Cypriot soil believing she was marrying the legendary Lionheart. She had no idea she was walking into a nightmare that would destroy her life and expose medieval Europe's most scandalous secret. The marriage had been arranged by Eleanor of Aquitaine as political alliance to secure Navarre's support. But by 1191, Richard was consumed by passion for Philippe that made marrying anyone else feel like betraying his very soul. According to Geoffrey de Vinsauf, who witnessed the wedding on May 12, 1191, Richard appeared pale as death throughout proceedings. Contemporary observers noted the bridegroom seemed distracted, distant, almost physically ill during what should have been his happiest day. Multiple sources record Philippe was conspicuously absent, a diplomatic insult that sent shockwaves through both courts. The wedding night was disaster that would haunt all three participants forever. According to later testimony from palace servants recorded in Winchester Cathedral archives, Richard spent less than an hour in the bridal chamber before emerging and walking directly to Philippe's quarters. Berengaria was left alone on her wedding night, still in bridal gown, weeping tears that would continue throughout her marriage. Contemporary chroniclers struggled to describe what they witnessed without stating obvious truth. Gerald of Wales wrote carefully, "The new queen seemed to inspire in her royal husband strange melancholy rather than joy, as though her presence reminded him of duties that conflicted with his heart's truest desires." The psychological toll was devastating. Berengaria, described as beautiful, intelligent, and devout, found herself married to a man who treated her with cold politeness at best, complete indifference at worst. According to letters in Navarrese royal archives, she wrote to her sister, "I am queen in name only. My husband's heart belongs to another, and that other is not a woman." For Richard, marriage represented ultimate sacrifice of authentic self on royal duty's altar. Historical analysis suggests a man in profound psychological crisis, torn between obligations as king and desperate love for Philippe. Ambroise noted Richard seemed like a man living in two separate worlds, neither bringing peace. Philippe's reaction proved most telling. According to multiple sources, the French king became increasingly cold toward Richard after the ceremony. Some historians theorize Philippe felt betrayed, believing Richard's willingness to marry proved their relationship meant less than royal duty. The marriage that was supposed to strengthen the crusade instead created a triangle of misery that undermined military effectiveness. Richard was distracted by conflicted emotions. Berengaria was isolated and bitter. Philippe began making independent military decisions, suggesting his alliance with Richard was fracturing. The most heartbreaking detail comes from Berengaria's letter to her confessor, preserved in papal archives. "I am married to a man who loves someone else with such passion that he can barely look upon me without pain. I am not his wife. I am his penance." But the real tragedy was yet to come. The marriage would become catalyst for betrayal so devastating it would shatter their love forever. The betrayal that would destroy Richard and Philippe's love forever began with political reality that neither king could escape. By summer 1191, their passionate relationship had become a liability, threatening not just personal reputations, but the Third Crusade's success and both kingdoms' stability. The first crack appeared during the Siege of Acre, when Philippe made a decision that would haunt both men forever. Without consulting Richard, Philippe announced his intention to return to France immediately after Acre's fall, abandoning the crusade and leaving Richard to face Saladin alone. The official reason was illness, but chroniclers knew the truth was more devastating. According to Rigord, Philippe's court historian, the French king had received ultimatums from both church and nobility: end the scandalous relationship with Richard or face deposition. The papal legate had privately threatened excommunication. French nobles questioned Philippe's fitness to rule, whispering that a king engaging in unnatural acts could not enjoy God's favor in holy war. When Philippe broke the news to Richard privately, witnesses outside reported hearing sounds that would forever change how history remembered the Lionheart. According to servants' testimony in Canterbury Cathedral archives, Richard's anguished cries could be heard throughout the palace. One witness described it as the sound of a man's heart being torn from his living body. The confrontation was explosive and heartbreaking. According to controversial historical analysis, Richard accused Philippe of using their love for political convenience, then discarding it when inconvenient. Philippe responded that he was trying to save them both from destruction, that their love had become a weapon enemies were preparing to use. But the most devastating blow came when Philippe revealed ultimate truth. He had begun negotiations for marriage to Ingeborg of Denmark, designed to prove his heterosexual credentials and silence rumors threatening his throne. For Richard, this felt like ultimate betrayal. Philippe was entering the same loveless marriage Richard had been forced into with Berengaria. The psychological destruction was immediate and complete. Contemporary accounts describe Richard falling into depression so severe he became unable to function as military commander. Ambroise wrote that King Richard seemed like a man whose soul had been extracted, leaving only an empty shell moving through kingship's motions. Philippe's departure from the Holy Land in July 1191 marked the end of medieval history's greatest love story, but began the most bitter rivalry. What had been passionate devotion transformed overnight into equally passionate hatred. The man Richard loved more than life became the enemy he would spend his life fighting. The political consequences were catastrophic for both kingdoms. Philippe returned to France and immediately began plotting against English territories, using intimate knowledge of Richard's psychology to devastating effect. Richard, left emotionally shattered, threw himself into increasingly reckless military adventures that seemed designed more to court death than achieve victory. According to letters in French royal archives, Philippe wrote to advisors, "I have sacrificed the greatest happiness I have ever known for my kingdom's sake. I pray this sacrifice will prove worthy, for I fear I have destroyed not just Richard's heart, but my own." The love that had promised to unite two kingdoms had become the source of war that would consume both for generations. Two men who found paradise in each other's arms were now trapped in hell of their own making. But Richard's greatest ordeal was yet to come. Alone, heartbroken, and increasingly reckless, he would soon face capture that would expose just how completely Philippe's betrayal had destroyed him. On December 21st, 1192, the unthinkable happened. Richard the Lionheart was captured while traveling through Austria and handed over to Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI like a common criminal. But this wasn't just political kidnapping. It was the final consequence of a love affair that had destroyed his judgment and left him emotionally shattered. The capture revealed how completely Philippe's betrayal had broken Richard's survival instincts. According to contemporary accounts, Richard was traveling with only a handful of companions, making elementary mistakes his sharp mind would never have allowed. Ralph of Coggeshall noted Richard seemed like a man who no longer cared whether he lived or died, taking risks bordering on suicidal. Duke Leopold of Austria orchestrated the capture for personal revenge, but historical analysis suggests he was acting on information provided by Philippe II, who had intimate knowledge of Richard's route and psychological state. The man who once shared Richard's bed was now using that knowledge to destroy him. In Dürnstein Castle, Richard faced not just physical captivity, but complete psychological collapse. According to letters smuggled out by sympathetic guards, preserved in Westminster Abbey archives, Richard spent his first months in what can only be described as severe mental breakdown. The most heartbreaking evidence comes from Richard's own writings during this period. Cut off from the world, facing possible lifetime captivity, Richard wrote poetry revealing his emotional devastation. One fragment discovered in castle walls reads, "Philippe, my beloved enemy, you hold the key to this prison more surely than any emperor, for you locked away my heart before they locked away my body." According to controversial historical theories based on these prison writings, Richard's captivity became a period of profound psychological reckoning. Alone with his thoughts for the first time since Philippe's betrayal, Richard confronted the reality that his forbidden love had cost him everything: military effectiveness, kingdom security, his very freedom. The ransom negotiations revealed how completely Richard had been abandoned. Philippe, now safely married to Ingeborg, and presenting himself as model Christian king, actively worked to keep Richard in prison, even offering the emperor additional money to hold him longer. The man who once wept at Richard's sickness now coldly calculated to extend his suffering. Perhaps most devastating were reports filtering back about Philippe's new life. According to intelligence gathered by Richard's agents, Philippe had embraced his role as heterosexual king with enthusiasm that felt like deliberate mockery of their former love. Every report of Philippe's public displays of affection for his wife was another dagger in Richard's shattered heart. The psychological transformation in Dürnstein was complete and irreversible. The passionate prince who once shared intimate secrets under Mediterranean stars became a bitter, hardened man whose capacity for love had been permanently destroyed. Contemporary accounts describe Richard's appearance when freed in 1194 as aged beyond his years, his eyes holding coldness that had not been there before. In letters to Eleanor, Richard wrote, "The man who entered this prison died here. What emerges is something else entirely. A king, perhaps, but no longer a man capable of the weakness you call love." The ransom of 150 Zoroastrian marks that freed Richard represented more than money. It was the price of a broken heart, cost of love that promised paradise but delivered only destruction. But even freedom couldn't heal the wounds captivity had exposed. Richard's final chapter would prove that some betrayals leave scars so deep they can only be healed by death itself. On April 6, 1199, at Chalus-Chabrol Castle in France, Richard the Lionheart died as he had lived his final years, recklessly, violently, and with Philippe's name on his lips. This wasn't just a king's death. It was the tragic end of a man whose capacity for love had been so destroyed that he could find peace only in death. The siege of Chalus was militarily pointless, a minor skirmish over treasure claims that any competent commander would have delegated. But by 1199, Richard was no longer fighting for strategic advantage. He was fighting to escape unbearable memories haunting every quiet moment. According to Roger of Howden, Richard had become obsessed with military action as the only way to silence voices in his head. The fatal crossbow bolt that struck Richard's shoulder might have been survivable with proper care, but evidence suggests Richard deliberately refused life-saving treatment. Multiple witnesses reported that when physicians urged rest to heal, Richard responded with bitter laughter. "What is the point of healing a body when the soul is already dead?" The most heartbreaking detail comes from Richard's final confession, recorded by his chaplain and preserved in papal archives. As infection ravaged his body, Richard spoke deliriously of Philippe, sometimes addressing him as if present. "Philippe, my love," he reportedly whispered, "I have kept our secret safe. Even dying, I have not betrayed you." The irony was devastating. Richard was protecting the reputation of the man who destroyed him. According to controversial historical analysis, Richard's behavior in final years suggests a man deliberately courting death as escape from psychological torment. The once brilliant strategist had become recklessly aggressive, personally leading charges that should have been left to subordinates, fighting with desperation of someone with nothing left to lose. His deathbed letters reveal emotional devastation's depth. In his final message to Eleanor, Richard wrote, "I die, as I have lived these past years, alone but no longer lonely. Death offers what life could not, peace from memory of love that destroyed everything it touched." Perhaps most tragically, Philippe learned of Richard's death while holding court at the Louvre, surrounded by nobles and wife Ingeborg. According to Guillaume Le Breton's chronicle, Philippe's immediate reaction was visible physical collapse. He fainted upon hearing news and remained in chambers for 3 days, refusing all visitors. The man who chose duty over love was finally confronted with his decision's ultimate cost. The secret Richard died protecting was buried with him at Fontevraud Abbey, but whispers never stopped. For 8 centuries, historians have debated the true nature of Richard and Philippe's relationship, unable to definitively prove what everyone suspected. Richard's tragedy wasn't that he loved another man. It was living in a world where such love was considered more sinful than the hatred that consumed both kings. Two men who might have found happiness together were destroyed by the very passion that should have saved them. Richard died at 41, never experiencing another love like the one that destroyed him. Philippe lived until 1223, ruling successfully, but reportedly never again, showing the passionate intensity that characterized his relationship with Richard. If this story has moved you, if it's opened your eyes to hidden chapters revealing the eternal human struggle between duty and desire, subscribe to this channel. There are so many more forbidden stories waiting to be told, so many secrets history tried to bury. Richard and Philippe's love burned bright enough to light up the medieval world, and dangerous enough to destroy two kingdoms. 8 centuries later, their story reminds us that some loves are worth dying for, even when they're too dangerous to live for.